So I'm curious, how many of y'all are mountains people? I realize that I say that. How many of y'all are mountain folk? Like that? That's probably sounds a little strange. Versus beach people? Okay, that's a significant number. Yeah, you notice I didn't even give you an option. How many of y'all are desert people? Anybody in the room a desert person? Maybe a few, but you're a rare breed. So, well, the reason that I chose that question, it does have a purpose, because in our story that we're going to get to in Exodus this morning, we're following up. Last week we were in a portion in Moses' life, and we're going to be sticking with a portion of Moses' life this week, but a very different part. And this morning we're going to come to a place where he and the rest of the people of Israel find themselves basically on the beach. But it's not because they chose there, and it's not because they're on vacation, and they're not, breaking out the rusted chairs and kicking their feet back and slathering the kids with lotion and trying to blow up the floats and telling the kids don't go out too far. There's a current out there. None of that is happening. They're being pursued, and they find themselves stuck. And so if you remember, and if you were here last week, the part of Moses' life that we were in, it was what we call sometimes the call of Moses, the point where he's run away from Egypt in fear for his life because he did something that didn't please Pharaoh very much. And so he ran, and he's tending flocks way far away from Egypt. And you remember God comes to him, and a bush lights ablaze right in front of him, and God speaks to him, and the bush is not consumed. And God tells him, I want you to go somewhere, I want you to do something, and it's specific, and you need to be faithful. And there were some points that we covered last week as far as listening and revering, obeying, trusting, remembering, a way to kind of guide our own prayer life, thought life. And so that happened in that part of Moses' life, and what we come to this morning is sort of a result of that, because what we really skip forward to is Moses did that. He listened to God. He was faithful. He went out and went down to Egypt and went to where God had sent him, and he spoke boldly before Pharaoh, and God provided every step of the way. And eventually, if we know the story, God kind of delivers through a series of plagues to a point where Pharaoh says, y'all get out of here, basically. Ever since you got here, you've been trouble. So go, yes, be released. So Moses takes the people of Israel, and they flee. But on their way out of town, Pharaoh has one of those second thinking moments and goes, all of our forced labor just walked out the back door. We kind of like living in our homes that are built by the forced labor. We kind of like coming to the palaces and the temples and the shrines and the places and the public places that are largely built by our forced labor. We kind of enjoy having them tend to our needs, and so probably should have thought a little more carefully about sending them and giving them permission to go out the back door. So Pharaoh musters all of his army and the chariots and charioteers, and they go in pursuit. And we know the story that the people of Israel get to the sea. And they look behind them, and all that they see are the charioteers chasing after them. And all they see in front of them is the sea. Very different than being on vacation, right? And so we pick up the story, and we're going to read some verses from the 14th chapter of Exodus, and I'm going to read them from the screen along with you. You're welcome to follow along. It says this. The angel of God who was going before the Israelite army moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel, and so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, And at dawn, the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them to their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Something that a lot of us are pretty familiar with, this story. But I'd be lying to you if I could stand here in front of you and explain it. There are things that I just don't have any clue how to explain. Last week, we covered that bush being set ablaze but not consumed. A voice coming to Moses from that bush or somewhere around it, telling him and giving him marching orders. I have no idea how that happened, what it looked like, what it was. We come to this story this week, the seas parting in front of them as Moses held up his hand. Folks, I don't have the slightest idea how that worked, what it looked like, what actually happened that day. I'm reading a book right now, and part of what it alludes to is the idea that just because we can't explain or completely agree on what happened or the mechanics behind something happening, that doesn't mean something didn't happen. The fact that I can't explain something or that you can't, or we might disagree in how something happened, doesn't mean something didn't happen. Does that follow? So this is one. I've read stories, you probably have over the years. There are scientists who say, well, this part of the story in the Bible is feasible because blah, 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 blah. There are other scientists who say, well, that's completely infeasible and it's a myth and it's made up and blah, 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 blah. There are people who say this is probably how it happened. Maybe it happened over this period of time or that. The fact that we may not agree or be able to explain it doesn't mean that nothing happened. And so what I believe happened in this story is that God provided in an incredible way, in a way that's unexplainable, in a way that my head probably can't really wrap its head around. I believe that's where it kind of transitions from a story of history to a story of faith, where we can look at something and say, I don't get how that happened, but all I know is that it happened. Can you imagine being one of those Israelites standing on the far side and looking back and kind of looking at one another and going, what? Did you do? What? How did that? And I imagine probably some of them were filled with, I don't know what just happened. I don't know how that happened, but all I know is that I'm standing here on dry ground. And I'm not sure how. It doesn't make any sense. So I think there are things that happen that we can't explain and that God can provide in ways that we can't explain. And so often it has to do with what we're willing to see. Maybe sometimes that are there things that we don't see at first, but that are there all the time. So if you'll let me play with this a little bit, y'all know that I'm a visual kind of thinker, learner, expresser, all that. So I've got some visuals. So the question is, what do you see? And that's where we're going to go for the rest of our time. But first, got a picture. What do you see? Do you see words? Oh, some people are still nodding no words. Some people are like, you guys are idiots. There's no words there. You guys are morons. You're making it up. We can't agree what we see. We can't. The words hide and seek. You see them? A few people still are kind of like, yeah, Brad, you're crazy. Do y'all remember? Some of y'all remember, like, I think it was like in the 90s, there were stores in the mall that had these posters, and they were all these small images, but if you would back up about 8 feet, and they always had one in like the window of the store in the mall, and so the only way to back up 8 feet was to back up and stand right in the middle of where people were walking. And like you would go to the mall, and like if you were with friends, you would go, and one person who had this weird, bizarre gift, they'd be able to walk up and be like, oh, that's the one with dolphins. Like, what? How did you? And so everybody would have to go and stand like 8 feet away and kind of, because you have to, you had to try and like make your eyes lazy and unfocus. And then something would, like, a dolphin would jump out in 3 dimensions. Yeah, do y'all remember those things? And I always hated them because if you're that person and you never can see it, and then you're just left standing in the middle of the mall, like, and you never see it. So there are things that you can see sometimes that are always there. I found this other thing that It just kind of blew my mind a little bit because when I first saw it, I thought, no, there's no way. So Denise, go ahead and run that video. So you get, those circles are just tracing a circle, right? Just tracing the circle going all the way around. Or are they? You, sir, are a scholar. This gets crazy. Wait for it. Wait for it. Get out of here. Are you serious? That none of those circles are actually moving in a circle. They're all just moving back and forth in straight lines. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, take a moment. Let that sink in. Your mind is now blown. You can't focus on anything else. There are things sometimes, and that always there, but you didn't have the eyes to see it. So a lot of y'all are probably traveling this summer, and our family is too. In July, we're going to be gone for a little bit and traveling out west, seeing some amazing things in nature. And so I had a couple of pictures of nature that I wanted to show you. So what a beautiful kind of cliff. How many of y'all see the person? What? There's a person in the picture? You got to be crazy. My eyes can't see it. Denise, where is it? Right there. Can you see her? Crazy, huh? Always there, but your eyes couldn't see it. There's one other. I love going to the mountains and streams, and so what a beautiful stream. Do y'all see the person? Bottom left. Curled up on the rock. So the question then, what do you see? The reason that I kind of play with that a little bit, to me, that is instrumental in this story of Moses and Exodus and coming to the sea and the seas parting. And the reason it's so critical to me is because if you back up just a few verses from what we read, you see in verse 15, God talking to Moses before this thing happens with the parting. And God is telling Moses, go forward. And I can't help but think that Moses is standing there, however it works to talk to God the way he was, and Moses was saying, go forward. And he turns and he looks at the waters. God, you just said go forward. My eyes don't see a way. My eyes don't see a path anywhere. I could stand back and stare at this sea before me all day, and a magical path is not going to appear, God. Go forward? Are you serious? And think about, if we backed up a little bit further, the Israelites have just been complaining to Moses. They see their end. They're looking at things and they're going, basically, put it in my words, Moses, this is so not cool. You brought us out of Egypt just so we could die here in the desert. Are you kidding me? It wasn't good enough for us to die old in Egypt as forced laborers where we had food to eat and water to drink. Moses, are you kidding me? Bad leadership, Moses. You should have known better. We should never have fought. That's where the people are. The people are looking out at what they see in front of them, and they're saying, I can't see it. There's no way. Go forward? You've got to be kidding. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You've got the army pursuing, and you've got a sea in front of you. Tactically speaking, Egypt had the severe upper hand, right? Egypt had them basically right where you want them, hemmed in completely, nowhere to go, no path forward, no way. But God did something, didn't he? In a way that I can't explain. And one thing that occurred to me as I was reading and preparing this week, I'd never thought of it this way. If you put on your English hat, is the sea a character in this story? It kind of is, right? But is the sea ever personified? I mean, does the Bible ever paint this picture of, and the sea was angry and was lashing out at the people of Israel? The sea is not personified in this, really. The pursuing Egyptian army are the kind of the antagonists. They're the ones going after. They're active. The sea is pretty neutral. The people come to it, and it's like the pursuers are behind us, but then there's this neutral element in their life that's out there in front of them. What does God use in that moment? He uses that neutral thing. But I think sometimes, like the Israelites, we're the same way. We look at everything as out to get us. Have you had those moments, maybe those seasons in life, or that a week or a day or even an hour where it's like, I can't get a break. Like everything. The world is out to get me. And like all of the things that are going on in the world are out to get me. You ever have those times? We have a mantra in our house sometimes. It can't just be easy. Because it's like, well, I was trying to fix that and then I made it worse. Because of course I did. And well, I went in to have a teeth cleaning and now it's a root canal. Because of course it is. And I was trying to mow the grass, and it slung up a rock and hit the neighbor's window, and now I have to fix that. And in the process of fixing that, they actually messed up part of the window frame, so they have to, because of course it did. And then there's this thing going on at work that I thought was going to go great, and it went completely south, and the company lost lots of money because of course we did. And now I'm fighting with my spouse at home because of course we are. And it feels like everything is conspiring against you. And I want you to maybe consider for a moment, if you're in that place this morning of feeling like, I'd love to catch a break with something. Maybe God would like to work through some of the neutral parts of life that you're just looking at it and you're assigning a value. Oh, that part's out to get me. Maybe not. Maybe you could look at places and say, you know what, maybe the way forward is actually right there. And maybe God can use that neutral place and change it and transform it. Just a thought. Maybe the window will heal itself. I don't know. We'll see. So we get this place, and we get the providing hand of God, seeing them through, parting the seas in a way that I can't explain, telling Moses and the people, go where? Forward. Go forward. Them saying, you got to be kidding. There's no way. This makes no sense. We can't do it. And God provides a way. So I think sometimes it's one thing to read about a person that like Moses, who, Faith Hall of Fame, he's been inducted, and we all can go somewhere and see like him enshrined. There's Moses. Let's go read about him. But we don't feel like we're in the Hall of Fame, do you? Raise your hand if you feel like I should be inducted into the Faith Hall of Fame, like Moses and Abraham. I'm one of those people. I don't feel like that. But I think what happens is we kind of assign this place that, that kind of stuff only happens to people like Moses. And so if you'll let me, I'm going to share a little bit. I've shared some of this story already on Sundays sometimes, but a place in my own life that feels a little bit like this. I wasn't running from an Egyptian army, but there was a way that I feel like God clearly delivered and provided. So I want to kind of walk you into this. 2002, 2003, early 2000s. Y'all have heard me say that in that place, Eric and I were married. Ian was a toddler, our son. We lived in Cartersville, Georgia. She was a social worker. I was a youth pastor. And combined, we were hauling in the money. We had to go buy wheelbarrows to tote stuff to the bank, because between a youth pastor and a social worker, oh, wow. Obviously in jest. We had bought our first home. No, we hadn't bought our first home. We had signed and told the bank that we would pay them for many, many years in order to, so we use that language, right? Oh, you own your home. No, we didn't. We were paying lots of money every month. But that was exciting. First home. We were doing all sorts of stuff there at the house. In my job at the church with the youth, I had just kind of become discontent a little bit. Not with the kids, not with the families, not with the work. Something just wasn't fitting anymore in my life. And I didn't quite understand it. Eric and I talked about it. She knew I was kind of, the way I phrase it is divine discontent. God was stirring something, and I didn't know what it was. And so I fought it, and I didn't want to ask, and I didn't want to ask. And at some point, through prayer, fasting, seeking wise counsel, I could take you to the spot on the road where I prayed, God, are you asking me to go to seminary and be ordained and be like a Reverend REV pastor guy person thing? And my interpretation of what I heard was, yes, now go forward. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't say when I heard those words, and that's not the words I heard, but when I heard that message, yes, now go forward, that I didn't look ahead of me and say, God, there's a lot of churning water out there. and I don't see the far shoreline. You're telling me to go forward. This makes no sense, God. My first thought was, how are we going to pay for this, God? Let me remind you, God, youth worker, social worker, toddler, bought our first house. God, how are we? Seminary's 3 years full time. Graduate program, God, that's not cheap. You know that. What are we going to do? And he said, I'm aware of all those things. Go forward. But God, it's full-time being a student. I can't work full-time and commute from Cartersville to Emory to go to school full-time. Like, I'm going to have to quit my job. Let me remind you, God, social worker, toddler, I'm going to have to quit my job. God said, I'm aware of all those things. Go forward. God, this doesn't make sense. We've just got some routines back down where Erica's gone back to work and we're figuring things out with a kid in tow and what this looks like, and we're just kind of hitting a stride. God, that's going to have to all be thrown out of whack and get shifted. And God said, thank you for informing me. Now go forward. And I got to a place, I remember in telling Erica that, and us talking about it, I think I have to do this. And I remember phrasing it in some way like, I can't not. I have no idea how this is going to shake out, and I'm scared to death, but I can't not. And I remember us talking about it, and we kind of landed that if God is calling for this, then I can't help but believe that the God who's calling for it will also provide for it. Make sense? That God's not going to leave us high and dry. He's not going to just point us in a direction and leave us alone. My faith is such that I just believe he's going to do that. And so with fear and trepidation and terror, I started contacting the necessary people. And I called Emory and Candler School of Theology, and I got somebody nice on the phone. This was February. And they said, I'm so glad you called now, because to be considered for admission and scholarships, you need to have all of this stuff in middle of next week. And guys, this was before you could call up your university that you went to undergrad and say, can you just you could overnight stuff, but it's you can't do a PDF. That stuff wasn't happening. And by the way, I had to have 5 letters of recommendation, and I had to have this, and you had to have that, and I had to write all these essays for scholarships and all sorts of stuff. And God was saying, go forward. Well, got all that submitted, and that's part of even the crazy part. All of that got submitted on time. People did what they said they would do. You call people, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? And then part of you thinks, I'm going to have to remind you 8 times, right? None of that. They all just did what it's like they hung up the phone, and in the next 12 hours, they had written it and gotten it in the mail. And they had received my transcript. And not long after that, I got a letter from Emory University saying, congratulations, we'd like to welcome you to the upcoming class from the Candler School of Theology. And by the way, we have received your applications for things, and we would like to let you know that you've received the Sherman Scholarship, which will pay for tuition. All of it. For 3 years. Backtrack with me saying, but God, this makes no sense. There's no way. How are we going to pay for it? God said, I know. Go forward. I had to pay for parking. You kidding me? Quit my job. God, how are we going to do this? This doesn't make sense. Well, not long after I quit my job, another church contacted me and said, I understand that you've got a background in music and you play guitar and you sing and you've done some leading worship. We're looking at starting a new contemporary service. Would you come and help us get that started? You'll basically only be working on weekends. They don't have classes at Candler School of Theology on weekends. So I helped them start a 9:39 worship service. It's still part of their worship schedule today in Dallas, Georgia. But God, I'm going to have to quit my job. What am I going to do? God said, I know, go forward. But God, I don't see a way. I know you don't. Go forward. Well, but money's so tight. I still don't know, this doesn't make sense. God, let me refer you again, child, social worker, da-da-da-da-da. Was down on the campus of Emory one day taking an exam. And, there's parts of campus buildings that you just never go in. And parts of buildings that maybe you go in the building, but then you find the recesses and weird places. I was in one of those buildings that I wasn't typically in for an exam. And it was on the lower floor, a room I'd never even seen, finished the exam, came out that door, looked on a bulletin board, and there was a paper job posting for someone to manage a website for the newspaper for North Georgia United Methodism. And they happened to be using some web tools that I was already familiar with and could use. I was in a part of the building I'd never even seen. But God, how are we going to do this? God said, I know, just go forward. So I worked that job like 5 years and was able to do it remotely. Their office was in Stone Mountain. I was able to sit at home in Cartersville. And are you kidding me? Well, fast forward to when all that was done, graduated from seminary, and this is how it's so cool the way God continues. If we'll just take a step forward sometimes, he'll say, I know you don't see a way. Let me make a way, maybe. Ian was about 4. I'd graduated. It was time to take my first appointment to be a pastor sent to a church somewhere. Didn't know where that was going to be yet. We were prepping our kid to basically say, we're going to leave the only church you've ever known and seen, and Daddy's going to go, and I'm going to be a pastor at another church somewhere. We don't know where that's going to be. And Ian made this offhand comment that to us, it was weird and strange at the time, and we didn't think much more about it until we looked back. He said, oh, are we going to go to that church with the tower? Because, so many of our churches have ramparts. And I mean, the church with the tower? What? Didn't think much about it. Until about a month later, I drove on to the property of the church where I ended up being appointed, and it looks like this. Ian had never seen that church. Are you going to the church with the tower? Yeah, buddy, we are. Whew. And when I look at that, there's a part of me that wants to tell you, and it's true, that tower in my mind rises on a shoreline on the other side of the waters. At the time I stepped toward the waters, I couldn't see it. It was distant. It was not even there. And eventually that tower came to signify, I'll provide for you and I'll deliver you if you'll go forward. I'll make a way. And from the mouth of a 4-year-old, God reminded me that he is in charge of way more than I am. And he knows far more than I do. So I don't know what your lives are this morning. I know some of them. I know some of the struggles. I know some of what the future may hold for some of you. I know some of what the present is holding for some of you. And it may be that you sit here this morning looking at some circumstances thinking, there's no way. God, you've got to be kidding. You're telling me to move forward with faith, and life around is a churning ocean or pursuers behind me. And I want to encourage you to hear what Moses heard. Go forward. Take a step. Trust that God will be there. Take another step. And in a moment, we're going to revisit a song that we've already sung this morning. And I want to just invite you, not going to expect or force, but I feel like it would be wrong if I didn't. In the story and the depictions that we read from Exodus, part of what it says is that Moses held his hands up over the water that represented uncertainty and fear. And so if you're led as we sing, you know what your water is. And if you're led physically to hold your hand up over it, then take an opportunity to say, God, I don't know how you're going to lead, but I'm holding my hands over this water of uncertainty and fear. Help me to find you and follow you. Let's pray. God, thank you for the way you provide. Give us the faith to step with you where you're leading, trusting that you will provide in ways that we can't and that we can't explain. Come and part the waters. Amen.